Hey, and we're back. All right. I finally got a new microphone stand too. Shout outs to Kynan. How you going over there on Instagram? Give some people a chance to join first, and then we'll get into talking about ATP and Brix, furthering our discussion the other week on Brix and your plants. Hope everyone's had a tremendous couple of weeks. It's been a couple of weeks since we've done a live. The rain sort of put a dampener on things last week. See some familiar faces over there on Instagram. Shout outs to you all. Hope everyone's having a good Sunday. All right. So last time we were on, we were talking about Brix levels, and we sort of shared with you some ways that you can measure your Brix levels at home using a couple of simple meters. And so some people have been sending us their results of that, trying different things to increase that level. And so today what we're going to talk about is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and how that kind of relates to this energy system, not only in plants but also in the microbes. So being that in soil there's a synergistic effect going on between the soil biology and the plant biology, it's interesting that there's this parallel that they share. In fact, all living things, it's the energy currency of living things, effectively. So Brix levels and ATP are closely related, and a plant that has a well-tuned ATP system or a well-tuned metabolism is going to normally default have a higher Brix level. So we'll get into a bit of today what it is, some ways that it works in plants and microbes, and some things that we're sort of incorporating into our range as a way to boost those things to sort of biohack the plant, one of our favorite little terminologies. So adenosine triphosphate is adenine, which is a nitrogen base, ribose sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. They're bonded by a high energy covalent bond. So the energy is stored in the phosphate bond, normally between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate group. And that's due to the repulsion from the negatively charged phosphate ions. So breaking that phosphate bond releases stored chemical energy to power metabolic reactions. So nutrient uptake, enzyme activity, if the plant's undergoing something where it needs to divert energy sources towards pathogens or pests, basically anything the plant wants to do is going to depend on that reaction. So the release phosphate in that is orthophosphate, which is the natural form that plants and microbes both naturally absorb. And that carries a negative electrical charge. So that contributes to the electrochemical gradients that are essential across all the cellular transport processing. So during photosynthesis, your chloroplasts, light energy drives this electron transfer, creating proton gradients, so hydrogen ions, across the membranes, and that converts ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, plus phosphorus back to ATP. So it starts as ATP, it gets converted to ADP, and then back to ATP again through photosynthesis. There is also cellular respiration, so in the mitochondria, where organic compounds are oxidized and electrons are transferred. Again, hydrogen proton gradients are generated and convert DP back to ATP, so through the ATP synthase enzyme pathway. So those electrical charges across the membranes are critical for efficient ATP synthesis. So that's something we sort of want to circle back to a little bit later. I just remembered one thing I've got to do too. I've got some chats over here. All right, now orthophosphate is, again, that's your simplest form of phosphorus, directly absorbed by plants and microbes. It's crucial for metabolic processes because, as we spoke about earlier, adenosine triphosphate actually contains phosphate as part of its structure, so it's integral. It's an essential structural component of ATP and also of DNA and RNA. So that's important in the expression of the plant. Obviously, damaged DNA and RNA is going to lead to mutations and lackluster growth. It's involved, phosphorus again, in phosphorylation, so activating enzyme and metabolic pathways again. That's why this system is crucial, because if you compromise this system, you tend to reduce quality. So those enzymes and metabolic pathways are what drive a lot of that quality. If there's less energy available for those, and there will be less of them. Orthophosphate must be biologically cycled. So it ideally has to be driven by breakdown of the microbes in the soil. So you could produce orthophosphates and feed them separately, and they'll sort of bypass that whole process. But then you sort of, even though you're providing it in an organic form that's very easily absorbable, you're sort of circumnavigating the whole microbe to plant reaction symbiosis that's going on there. So it's less beneficial. Biologically generated orthophosphate by your microbes, so when they liberate it from something, conserves ATP within the plant and tends to maximize ATP within the microbes themselves, because you are giving them something to do. They have an activity. They have something to break down. I don't take song requests, I'm sorry, but happy birthday. Right. So one of the ways that you can sort of ensure that you're providing things in that two-step process, so giving something to the microbes for the microbes to break down and then feed the plant, is providing it in the form of things that actually require something to be broken down. So even though you could apply orthophosphate separately, what we've found is, you know, in our opinion, a good way of doing it is with something like the aquamarine fertilizer, for instance. We spent a great deal of time working out a way to hydrolyze the fish bones and then micronize them to a level where they're super well available, but we maintain what are called phosphoproteins within that fertilizer. And so phosphoproteins are a complex molecule that includes phosphate as part of an amino acid chain. So it sort of piggybacks it onto the back of things like serine and theanine and things like that. But yeah, mostly serine is phosphorated. So that's a way of sort of getting phosphate into the plant in a different way without sort of getting it from your typical amendments. It's sort of a bit more of a specky sort of a one. There's also phospholipids, and so some things provide a fatty acid with a phosphate bonded to it. So that's another way that you can sort of get organic phosphorus. And both of those are ATP friendly. Both of those are pro-Brix. Just responding to some comments on YouTube there. And so microbial enzymes act on these phospholipids, phosphoproteins, and release orthophosphate, and also liberate things like fatty acids and amino acids and other things during that process. So as a byproduct of that process, you also get secondary compounds that are produced. So while, as we sort of spoke about, the temptation is to have things immediately available because that sounds nice, you miss out on a lot of that secondary compounds because there's no secondary process. So by feeding things that are quickly broken down, but actually have to go sort of through the microbial pathway, you get the benefit of that, plus you get stuff that's quite widely available. And in the instance of your phospholipids, you also get fatty acids and glycerol and other sort of byproducts that microbes can directly break down that further fuels that whole process that's going on. So this improves ATP levels within the plant. It's a favorable food, and so the microbes tolerate it quite well and enjoy it. And so you end up with good phosphorus availability and a robust secondary metabolite production. So things like your auxins, all of those lovely plant growth promoting compounds that microbes can produce. So you would find your phosphoproteins typically in things that come from bone, and also actually in some milk products. That's why you have to watch consuming too much of certain protein powders, because you can actually ingest too much phosphorus that way. So because these they have to go through the microbial pathway, but they also contain ingredients that are microbial stimulatory, plant stimulatory, and the secondary compounds that result from this also fuel that whole process. That's why it's a better way of going about sort of applying that stuff if you're concerned with the ATP levels of the plant. So then we get to ATP within microbes. So microbes, fungi, bacteria, yeast, they also critically depend on ATP for all their metabolic and cellular functions. This includes growth, reproduction, enzyme production, secondary metabolite synthesis, and biofilm formation. Basically anything they want to do. Aerobic respiration is one way. So oxidation of organic compounds, and that will transfer electrons via the electron transport chain, creating a hydrogen ion gradient across membranes. And that gradient-driven flow of hydrogen ions through ATP synthase generates ATP efficiently. This is a high energy process, and so it supports enzyme production. So that's your phosphatases, your cellulases, nitrogenase, chitinase, all these enzymes that are useful at degrading and converting organically bound nutrition into ones that are usable by plants. So that's in an aerobic sense. In an anaerobic sense, so yeasts, certain bacteria, things like EM1 microbes, a lot of that sort of stuff, they generally generate less ATP, but they produce a lot of secondary metabolites, so things like your organic acids, alcohols, and these tend to stimulate nutrient cycling and soil ecology and of themselves. Yeasts prefer amino nitrogens, so they can absorb ammonium, but yeast is yeast assimilable nitrogen. I wrote a blog post on that, which I mentioned the other week on the Brix talk. But there is a correlation between yeast assimilable nitrogen and microbe health. And it just so happens that what tends to be YAN, or yeast assimilable nitrogen, tends to be very easily assimilable, that's a good word, by the plant too. So a more robust ATP system in your microbes enhances your nutrient cycling. So you'll have greater availability and efficiency of those microbes in converting things like your nitrogen, phosphorus, micronutrients over and making those available. And it directly correlates with higher ATP efficiency within the plant, because the plant is getting more of what it needs more often. It doesn't, and in forms that are actually more biologically available and biologically suitable to the plant. So whether it has to do less to access those, or whether once those forms are within the plant, they do less damage, or they require less conversion by the plant. So in the instance of something like nitrate, that requires a large ATP investment to sort of convert it from nitrate. So, convert it from NO3 to NO2 to NH4 and then to amino acids. That uses a lot of carbon up within the plant. So that therefore lowers your Brix levels. So, bonus, you solve your nitrogen deficiency. The downfall of that is the plant's had to sort of use up energy that it could have used for other stuff to convert that over. So as I mentioned, synthetic nitrate ammonium forces plants to use ATP to reduce inorganic forms into usable amino acids and proteins, because they cannot be used directly, even though they are readily absorbed. So there's a difference there. Just because something is readily absorbed does not mean that it's metabolically the best thing, or that doesn't then require conversion. Now, synthetic phosphates, so these are your rapidly available ones, whether that be DAP, MAP, or monopotassium phosphate. These are all super common. Most commonly sold bloom boosting products in the hydroponic industry include this. It's quite a cost-effective ingredient. It's quite powerful per gram, but it is not the best thing for microbes, and it does not have the correct ratios for the target crop the majority of the time. It's way too rich in phosphorus, and the ratio of phosphorus to potassium is just all the way out. But even synthetic phosphates alone that don't provide potassium at the same time, that rapidly available process interferes with cycling of phosphorus within the soil. So it will interfere with how microbes like your mycorrhizae work. If it doesn't frazzle them, it certainly limits their growth. Part of that growth is driven by the plant exuding exudates that actually attract and multiply those, so effectively a signaling from the plant. The plant signals less of that when it's getting rapidly available phosphorus. So that kind of circles back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about the orthophosphate. Even though it's a very suitable biologically form, because it circumnavigates having to be broken down, it still does have, it still does sort of mean the ATP system takes a bit of a hit that way. And certainly you're not increasing the levels of your phosphorus cycling that way. So what this generally leads to is a decline in the biology related to cycling that. Weaker plants that have lower secondary metabolite production, especially when that input is then withdrawn. So if you try something and then go back to doing it the other way, that process doesn't exactly just immediately rebound. Usually these things have to be built up over time, and just say applying something ad hoc and then re-inoculating with a mycorrhizal supplement the following week might not get it all working again within days like people might think. It may take quite a bit longer than that, because to build up a working food web like that takes time. So we got a little bit into sort of some biohacking stuff with talking about phospholipids and phosphoproteins. Amino acid combinations are also another thing that you can sort of get towards metabolic tuning within the plant, because far from being just usable nitrogen, amino acid chains, peptides, and certain amino acids themselves have powerful signaling processes within the plant. So they can actually be used to exogenously augment plant bioprocesses. So by focusing on nitrogen inputs that reduce down to amino forms and other sorts of organic nitrogen forms that are more preferred by both the microbes and the plant, finally, you end up with sort of a synergistic system there that's working quite well. If you're providing high quality forms, that's even better, because you're not sort of dealing with, say, bad byproducts from improper compost or things of that nature. So orthophosphate, biologically generated by your microbes in the soil, good stuff. Phospholipids, phosphoproteins, complex organic phosphorus sources provided by organic amendments, also good stuff, all pro-ATP, pro-Brix. The use of these sorts of things results in a more optimized metabolism. So both for your microbes and for the plant, because they can both use these compounds. It's not just applying, say, a salt, which is usable for the plants, but not for the microbes. It's kind of looking at both. Both are involved in the system, and so both need to sort of be included there. And this optimized system then results in the increased production of secondary compounds, so really the valuable stuff. We're not talking about just producing large amounts of biomass, as cool as it is to sort of, go on about yield. Really, it's the valuable compounds is really what the actual crop's been produced for. So your terpenes, cannabinoids, flavonoids, phenolics, all these sort of compounds are really what you're trying to maximize. And a well-functioning ATP system within a plant, a high Brix plant, generally has more of those compounds. You will also end up with stronger, more resilient, more nutrient-rich plants. So even just looking at producing crops and then testing their nutrient value from a nutritional perspective, they will have higher nutrient levels, better for people. So in turn, basically, you've got to manage that phosphorus delivery and your nitrogen system and other inputs in a way that sort of factors those energy systems in play. So realizing that anything that sort of delivers anything very short term is usually going to cost something somewhere. And kind of, if you are going to supply something that's rapidly available, what is that thing and what systems is that actually going to involve? So in the cases of aminos, very easily available, not really many downsides to doing that. In the case of some other things, there is a sort of amount of care you've got to involve, because as we've sort of spoken about throughout this, phosphorus is very key. And so sort of monkeying around with that system too much, or just applying a more is more mentality to that, definitely isn't a way to optimize that metabolic system. So you can sort of, in short, think of ATP within plants as a rechargeable cell battery. So it's constantly charging and discharging to fuel metabolism. You can think of effectively the synthetic phosphorus and nitrogen sources as cheap fuel, effectively, because they solve something in the short term, but they create a longer term metabolic health problem. So it's a bit like you're hungry, so you have fast food, but then in the long run, it wrecks your metabolism. Things that need to be broken down by microbes and have to go through that pathway generally fuel that whole system better than things that are fully broken down to the point where it doesn't involve that system. All right, so if I haven't completely lost everybody, let's see if there's any Q&As on what I've been babbling about. There may be some. I've got one watcher over there on Twitter and a couple over there on YouTube. I think there still might be a couple of people on Instagram. All right. Well, looks like I covered it this week. Sort of went over it. So if you sort of link the discussion we had last week about Brix and this one about ATP together, you can sort of start to realize some of the energy processes involved within your plant. So they're not sort of a super simplistic organism that just runs on nutrients. There's a lot of biological processes going on there, and it's within those biological processes that there's opportunity to sort of exploit various pathways. So passive organics gets you some of the way there, but then actually looking at some of those systems and how they evolved, how they work, is sort of some of the ways that we're looking at trying to next level things a little bit. But all right, might leave it there for today. Thank you very much. Appreciate people joining in, and we'll catch you on another one.